This podcast was recorded on traditional Denizal land.
Hello, it's Trey. Welcome to Before the Peace. Today you're going to hear my interview with Stewart Cameron, a former chief of Saulteau First Nation and the Treaty 8 Tribal Association. We delve into some milestones and just the overall work that he put in as chief in the Northeast, as well as his work in the oil and gas sector. The main discussion I have with Stewart is about his current work as the owner of Makwa Consulting, which focuses on cultural safety. Now, I'm going to read a little bit of the information sheet about the consulting company that Stewart owns, just to kind of wrap your head around it before we get into the interview. The goal of his work is to understand the current state of Indigenous partnerships in industry. Once that is established, they weave a path to add value to any current and future relationships with Indigenous communities using cultural safety. Now, cultural safety is a concept arising out of the New Zealand Māori culture. Makwa has developed the method to move this concept into action. Known as cultural safety way of being, organizations can transform existing internal and external relationships. Transforming these interactions supports power-balanced, respectful relationships that ensure mutually beneficial partnerships. We also touch on Stewart's upbringing, the influence of his granny, and his thoughts on the state of the oil and gas industry in the region. Before we hear from Stewart, make sure you email me at beforethepeace@energeticcity.ca or beforethepeace@moosefm.ca for any comments you have or story ideas. Also, this podcast wouldn't be possible without the help of Troyer Ventures. Troyer has been serving our community and the energy industry with tank and vac trucks since 2000. They are built on the principles of hard work, service, and community, and they are proud to offer the financial support to make this program possible. Let's get into the interview with Stewart Cameron. First off, I want to know your work with cultural safety through Makwa Consulting and how important it is for industry and Indigenous people.
Before we even get to that, I'd like to just, let folks say here, this part of it, that my name is Stewart Cameron, and my Indigenous name is Kiwitnoch, which means North Star. And I was given that name through a ceremony, a sacred ceremony of ours. What it means or signifies for us is, as I was told, is that just like the North Star, when the other stars start getting out of line, my granny used to say, the North Star kind of realigns them.
Okay.
So she said, your role here, because my granny years ago in the 60s, right? Years ago, our people also knew about the stars, eh? Like my granny didn't speak a word of English or whatever, eh? She was an Anishinaabe Cree. That means Saulteau Cree, right? Or Ojibwe, whatever you want to call it, eh? And so she knew about the stars and what they were and the different parts of those stars and what it represented, eh? The Big Dipper, and all this stuff, the bear, or, we called it different, right?
Yeah. Did each constellation have a different meaning?
That's right.
It did, okay.
Yeah, but I didn't learn all that because to learn all that, you have to pretty well grow up with it right from a baby. Because it's a lot of knowledge, right?
Yeah, and is that just coming from the elders? Knowledge and what the stars mean and carrying on? Spoken word.
Yeah, it goes even beyond that because of our ability in a spiritual way to be able to see things further than the human could see, sort of thing, or a human body could see, right?
So that kind of, that name kind of set you up for your life's work?
Yeah.
That's where you're getting at? Yeah. I can see that just with your description of the name. It seems like, so then, how does it tie into like I said, how does it tie into that cultural safety and that importance?
I was working for Severus Pipelines. I worked for them for about 18 years.
Okay.
Yeah, I just stepped down a little while ago. But in it, Sean Severus and I, good feller, nice young feller. Hey, anyway, he wanted me to work with him after I stepped away from politics that time as a tribal chief and a chief. Okay, and he asked me if I would come in and meet with him and talk to him about some stuff, and he wanted to improve his relationships, his style with the Indigenous folks in the area. Eh? So we began talking and kind of had a good discussion there, and basically it kind of took off from there, I could say,
Oh, okay.
without me knowing I was doing cultural safety, okay? Because I learned about cultural safety later on in my life, and it came out of the academia world, and I'll explain that later on. But so we built a system because of the fact that it was a policy. That's all Sean had at the time, was a policy, and we talked about it, and I said, it's nice to have this, but all you're saying is you love us.
Yeah.
There's no action behind it. So I think we need to develop a system with you, so that you can create an engagement booklet of types where you'll talk about pre-bidding. How do you involve the local First Nations pre-bidding? If you're successful, how do you involve First Nations? Pre-construction, how do you involve First Nations as far as employment training and all that stuff, eh? So I said we should write all that down during construction. How do we maintain that relationship with some of the Indigenous workers you're going to have in your projects, eh? And post, instead of being the normal pipeliner or people coming through here in the oil and gas industry where it's just, hello, thanks for working for me, goodbye. I said, since you're here locally too, we should talk about post-construction and how does that relationship continue. So I said those are the things. So we made a booklet to that effect, over the years. Took a few years, but we got there, and and later on in 2019 I met up with a friend of mine. She's from here, Judy Mays. She was the tribal chief also during that, right after I was tribal chief,
Okay.
the 3-day tribal association. And we met up with her and her friend Adrienne Luce, who's a nurse by trade or whatever, but she also studied cultural safety, and cultural safety came out of the Maori Indigenous nurses.
Oh, in New Zealand.
Yes,
Okay.
that's where it grew from, back in the 70s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and anyway, so they introduced it to the world per se, okay, and Canada kind of embraced it.
Yeah.
Not Canada, I should say, the Indigenous folks embraced it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, and then we were talking, and they were talking about cultural safety and what it means, like to understand each other's worldviews. And from that, when you understand each other's worldviews, you don't have to change each other's worldviews or change each other's ways, whether it's the language. Okay, good example, residential schools, what happened there. The language, the culture, the way of, I don't know even the word for it, but the way I go to ceremony, in my sweat lodge and all that. And, and I'm talking about the Plains people, right? From Ojibwe, we came from back east to here. Eh?
Yeah.
That's another long story. But anyway, it's about looking at each other's worldviews and looking at industry's worldviews from the Indigenous side. So once the parties do that, then they kind of create a power balanced relationship based on respect, so that they make it so it's power balanced. So it's not a one over the other kind of struggle back and forth, like a long, painful, excruciating chess game.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you create that so that there's a balance, there's a power balanced relationship, and in that you can create relationships that are equally just as giving to the other party as to the other. So you can create a relationship where if the industry needs are here and your needs as an Indigenous nation or whoever, right, you can still create a relationship and look after each other and share the same river. Maybe you can picture it like a canoe going down a river and a steamboat, so you can share the same river, different world views, but you don't have to come in and drive my canoe, or I don't have to go in and drive your steamboat, but we can share that river and its resources so it benefits both of us. That's what kind of like cultural safety is about. It's about creating a power balanced relationship where you don't have to go meet with Indigenous folks or industry for that matter from the other side and have an agenda per se that you want something, right?
So how is it implemented? Like, do you do it through workshops and things like, because it doesn't seem like this isn't something that can just be fixed in, one session, one workshop. So generally with you and Makwa Consulting, which you own Makwa Consulting, right? Or
That's
you
right.
yeah.
That's right, yeah.
So through Makwa Consulting, you have these workshops. How long do they last, and when do you start seeing that difference within industry?
I can give you an example.
Okay. Yeah, no, perfect.
Yeah. We started working with, and I might get the year wrong here, but that's okay. We started working with a Peace River Regional District in this area. They were probably the first ones, okay? And we worked with the board. That's the mayor and councils and the different directors of each area, electoral area, they call them.
The regional directors. Yeah.
All those guys, And so what we did was we did a cultural safety workshop right out of the gate, a 4-hour one. What we did was we taught them the history and about who we were and who we are. I'm speaking about as Indigenous peoples today. Right? So we taught them the history and the impacts that happened to our people over the last probably 600 years now. Yeah.
So they have that understanding, and that's a good base to start that
Yeah.
relationship and have that middle ground with
Well,
both parties.
and I was honest, and I talked about my own struggles as an Indigenous person, my lived experience, and what I came through with my alcohol and being lost in drugs and all that stuff, and how my anger at society or government or whatever it may be, right? And because of what happened to our people and that, and when I started understanding the whole history, and I realized, how many 600 years of what I was packing.
That generational trauma, right?
So intergenerational trauma comes up, right? And so we talk about that too, about who we are, So, and I talk about the past, who we were, very sophisticated, intelligent, in relationship with your environment, people like where babies were taught right from newborn all the way into the elder years, right? Kind of thing. And the roles that they had to play, so we you get a perception of our people as if, and it's sad, but it's, you get this perception that, and we even developed that over the years because our memories were erased about who we were, a lot of us, right? So you got that perception that, we were running around the bushes and we were kind of starving and we were poor and we were hungry and we weren't clean and we weren't very, very bright, sadly. That was the perception, and it's so wrong, right? So that's why I teach cultural safety, to show people, no, this is the damage it caused, Already way back then, say 400 years ago, the pressure was coming from the east and it was being felt where tribes were being pushed into each other, So what happens when you do that? Of course, the other people are going to think, the other tribes are going to think, you're invading. So that's where those differences happened. It wasn't by choice, so to speak. And I tell people, if we were viewed as who we are by the average Canadian, of being maybe, I quit high school. I maybe a lot of us went to jail and
drugs, alcohol,
all that stuff. That's who we kind of get labeled that way, without people fully understanding the impact that what had happened to us, and so.
And the impact of their words by blanketing all Indigenous people under that, right?
Yeah. So you grow up with that, So you grow up with that, and even myself as an Indigenous, you begin to believe that story. That maybe to the point where a lot of us say, growing up, I don't know, why was I born an Indian? Sadly, that can happen because of people when they get oppressed, right?
And then you have that identity crisis of why am I,
different. Why am I
so brutal?
Yeah.
Is that something you went through when you were younger?
Yeah.
Did you have an identity crisis? So
Yeah.
how did you get through that? Embracing
My granny.
Okay.
Yeah. My granny taught me a lot, and she taught me about being a human being first.
Yep. And that's what it all comes down to. We're all human beings.
Yeah. And she said, she told me about how good our people were. She said, if we were bad people, they wouldn't even step on our shores. They would, because there was a lot more of us, right? Mm-hmm. They would have been slaughtered before they even put a foot on the shores, eh? But because of who we are, and
They
you
took
should be proud
advantage of the kindness. Right?
We
Yeah.
said, come into our home. You look hungry, and da-da-da. Here's the food, here's this, here's that. And we started teaching them about our land and how they could benefit from it. And it was all based on, I'll say this honestly, a culturally safe approach, where it was power balanced. Eh?
So you explain that to the district in that workshop. 4 hours. Do you do additional workshops after
Yes,
that?
yes,
Okay.
yeah, we
And
continue.
so how long does it last for the sessions of workshops? And my question too is, how do you gauge the success of the workshops? Do you do follow-ups as well, or how does that work? Keep in touch with them?
Yes. We're going into a phase now where we call it Cultural Safety 102.
Okay.
And what it is, after teaching cultural safety, and they did a graphic illustration on the kind of a mandate of their organization on how to become a culturally safe organization, meaning their better understanding of the treaty, where we say the treaty was, and it's true for us, it was not an extinguishment. It was a treaty of peace, sharing, and coexistence, based on, once again, cultural safety. So I wasn't surprised later on in years, like 2019, when I heard it came out of the Māori Indigenous nurses, cultural safety. Of course it did. Right?
Yeah.
But they gave it an academic word, right?
Hear about the Maori all the time, and,
Yeah.
and their advancements is crazy. Some of the thought processes they have.
Yeah.
So again, like within a year's
Yeah.
time, you had the first 4 hour session with the district.
Yeah, and-
When's the next one? How many do you have after that?
After that, we had about, I'd say, off the top of my head, we probably had about 3 or 4. And we did it in different layers. We did it with a board, and then we did it with also with a staff lunch and learn, and it was really good because I think they have about 60 people on staff, and it was a volunteer thing.
Yeah.
The CEO or manager or whatever, he had told his staff, it's up to you if you want to, this is what it is, eh? And I think there was 40 out of 60 that
Oh,
we did.
wow.
So it was really well received.
Yeah.
And like Peace River Regional District had a lot to learn, because they were stuck on their perceptions too, about different things.
And I think some local governments or regional municipalities still are, right?
Yeah.
So it's good that there are these services.
And some of our public.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
But if we can do this, and like what I say, if I could keep doing it, I'm going to keep doing it. Yeah, there's no stopping. But I'm doing it in a way where I'm teaching cultural safety and the history of our people and what really happened, the intergenerational trauma, and how we can deal with it. And and do it in a way I do it, and my friend Adrienne Lewis, who's a nurse, right? And she did her master's in cultural safety in the academia world. So I bring the traditional side of things, knowledge, right? And she brings in the academia world, right?
So it's just you two doing the
Yeah,
consultations?
yeah, right,
Wow,
yeah.
wow, a lot of work for 2 people.
Yeah.
So is the average about 4 sessions with each group, industry,
Depends on
whoever?
how many layers they have.
Okay, so you kind of discuss with them prior,
Yeah.
kind of how much they want to go into it, or how many sessions they want to. Okay.
Well, what we'll usually do is we'll do a PIS sheet, project information sheet. So it'll say, for this window, we'll do this, and yeah,
And so, sorry.
So when Peace River Regional District, when they did that graphic illustration, going back to it, it defined kind of like their mandate and mission statement of the new PRRD from becoming towards becoming a culturally safe organization.
So they take all this information and then they make the adjustments they need on the government side to have that within policies. And
maybe their webpage is going to say it'll relate to a cultural safety statement about Treaty 8 or whatever it may be, their understanding of it, that it's non-extinguished, all that stuff. That's peace, sharing, coexistence. So
after all the sessions are done, do you then link back up with whoever, say the district? So how does it work? So you like phone them back up and see how they implemented everything that was learned?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, they're not even a point all the way yet of implementing. We'll still have to guide them, and that's the 102 side of cultural safety. We did a 101, right? Yeah, introduction and real in-depth historical stuff and lived experience. I shared my lived experience. My mom being in residential school, being sent to Gruard, and my late uncle, where he was about 6 years old, died over there, right? And then my mom had a rough time there too, because they couldn't speak their Cree language and that, et cetera, right? And my mom,
on top of all the other abuse and things that they're probably dealing with,
and my mom went through a lot, like bad stuff, to the point where she couldn't even talk about it right away. Like she would cry when she was trying to tell me the story.
Yeah, some people still can't talk about it to this day, and I understand. We had a guest on earlier on in the podcast. I think this must have been now like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Wow, it's been a while.
Yeah.
And he was our only anonymous guest.
Yeah.
And it was because he was talking about his family's history with residential schools, and he was sharing that, and he obviously got the, approval to do so, because you don't want to just put out someone's, traumatic story like that. But we kept him anonymous just so, for his safety and his safety of his family and those stories. And I was speechless the whole time. It's, and I've, from there, and the relationships that I've built with other Indigenous communities and people in the communities themselves, I've heard many stories, and they all are on a similar path with residential schools, like the same, abuse and bad things, negative things, but, they still do have their own perception of what happened, right?
Like a lot of these things, as an Indigenous person, we don't want to talk about them. Because I want to be normal, right? But I found out that we need to talk about them so people will understand. And by understanding, we can create a better relationship with each other. Because I always tell people, I'm not free, as in freedom, whatever. I didn't go to Ottawa though. But anyway, I'm not free in the sense until you're free also. Meaning you understand my worldview. And as a Canadian, then you start to become free. When you start to become free in that sense, and we're both free, and then I'll be totally free.
That seems like an uphill battle though. How do we get to that point?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well,
I mean, I guess it's with services like this, with the consulting and having these constant conversations. And like, you even see it here in Fort St. John, and PRD, and you hear them bring up, okay, well, how are we communicating with Indigenous communities? If it's just, it doesn't matter the topic. How are we communicating with Indigenous communities? You hear that brought up, and I think that we're moving on a good path just by hearing that, and just by, personally, in my perception, hearing, less and less of, like I was saying, those stereotypes you were talking about, hearing less and less of the people saying those stereotypes in a negative way, right? Because people are standing up and they're talking about the past, they're talking about what they're going through now, and they're talking about, hey, we got to embrace everyone on this land in Canada now. So, how did you get in? Oh, sorry, continue.
I really, really think that it's not as hard as you think.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it's, I guess it's because I believe in it. I believe in people. I believe in people willingness to learn and to change. We all have that as humans. We all want something that's good for our children, whether you're Indigenous or Canadian, right? We all want something that's good for our children. We all want security. We all want good shelter. We all want good education. And I think the more people start to understand that about each other, and figuring out a way on how to work together to make that happen, even at this level here in the Peace River area in Treaty 8, I really believe that, and I told PRRD this, we can be the leaders where other people are going to look at us.
Well, to your point, I definitely see that in this region. I do. I truly think, and so I'm assuming you agree with me, like you are seeing that in the Northeast. Like you do think we are progressing well.
Starting.
Okay,
It's
okay.
starting. Yeah. It's starting. And I think maybe the ugliest parts of it is it seems that maybe there's more, the loud people are louder, even though there's few. You know what I mean? And sometimes
Especially on Facebook.
Sometimes the good people stay home.
Or stay quiet. Yeah.
That's what I mean. So, I like we're working also now with Northern Lights College,
Oh, nice.
right? So
They're doing a lot too, which
we're
is
bringing,
awesome to see.
we're bringing cultural safety into that organization, right?
Which is so awesome because they have so many international students. So then these students
yes.
are then gaining this knowledge that can then potentially, it helps the region, but it could be brought to other places
That's right,
in the
that's
world,
right,
which
that's right.
is crazy. That's
so-
awesome.
So everybody's kind of on board here. We've got the education side, we've got the industry side, we've got the government side per se, in our area, local government, and then we've also begun working with the Saulteau First Nations on a cultural safety approach.
Awesome.
So we're doing it so that we're spreading it out so that eventually, what I'd like to see one day, and I told my business partner this, Adrian. I said, when we get to a certain point of doing cultural safety with all these different groups, I would like to invite them all to one place to kind of share the experience.
That's a great idea. I would love to listen to that too.
Of cultural safety.
Yeah, and see what the teachings turned it into, like the perception of it from
Yeah.
each person. That is super interesting.
'Cause
Yeah.
I was talking to Peace River Regional District and the band, the First Nations band.
Yeah.
I said, just think cultural safety. We start to understand each other. We respect each other, and we say what's best for my neighbor, what's best for us. But in the middle, we share in a power balanced relationship. I said, just imagine in a Peace River area. I told him, for example, a little thing like we start our own gardening, market gardening. Healthy foods, and we create in the towns of Fort St. John or Chetwynd or Dawson Creek little market areas where people can bring their goods and then we go in and buy these goods from each other, right? And I said, just imagine what that can create, and then eventually Peace River invites the world, so I've got big dreams.
Yeah. It sounds great. I'm just sitting here like, let's do it.
And I think it can. It will happen. I really believe it.
Well, like I said, the way we're moving, and Northern BC, we're so remote. I know I don't need to say this to everyone who lives up there, but we're so remote. We're so separated from Southern BC and the rest of Canada. Yeah. And, there's a lot of other rural places like that in other provinces as well, where we feel like we're on our own. And I don't think, me being associated with other people in media who've been to smaller communities, I think the progression that's being made in Northeast BC is ahead of a lot of the other rural areas here in Canada, in my opinion, and from what I've heard. How did you get into that part of the industry? It seemed like a natural progression, which I think you kind of alluded to already, is, growing up in Saulteau First Nation, you had your granny and your family there with you, kind of showing you the culture and showing you how to embrace the culture. You ended up as an electrician. I'm just kind of fast tracking what you've done. You were a chief of Saulteau. You were a tribal chief of Treaty 8. And then you went back into the industry, and now you're doing consulting. It just seems like this was a natural progression for you. You gained the knowledge in industry. You gained the knowledge in politics. And now you're taking your advocacy and your passion for your people and Indigenous culture in general, and now you're sharing it with everyone else so we can be on the same page. Is that fair to say?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. I everything I've done leading up to today has set the table towards cultural safety. Right from my younger years with my granny. and her teachings,
Mm-hmm.
you know, all those things. Like I told people, I said, we have Treaty 8 here in this area, Treaty number 8, right? Which was, you know, signed in 1899, June
Yeah.
21st in Lesser Slave Lake area.
Oh, wow. I didn't know June 21st. Where did you say Lesser Slave Lake?
But yeah,
Okay.
in those areas.
Yeah.
Yeah, Gerard, all over.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we didn't do adhesions here till the later years because of the Klondike Gold Rush.
Mm.
It made an alarming thing because there was an impact already from that industry coming through the territory. So the Daneza and the Sekene people at that time didn't like what was happening, and the Crees were here already too. I think that time, you know, later years, after the 1900s, early 1900s, talking about. Anyway, and so they prevented the Klondikers from going through into the gold rush, the gold rush era, because there was damage already being done when they were coming through, disrespect for the land, the animals, right? So then they treated with us, and each band, like right up to Prophet Fort Nelson, we all have different years where we did adhesion with Treaty Number 8 after 1899.
Okay.
Some of us were 1910, 1914, and et cetera, yeah. Like and Kelly Lake was also mentioned historically in our research that they should have been treated too, because there's records of saying we'll treat with Kelly Lake after, we'll treat with McLeod Lake after, we'll treat with Ingenika after, all those things.
And now there's just progression going on in Kelly Lake right now of like actually building the community. And I don't know anything about relations with the treaty, but I know they're actually kind of building it up now, and they're doing work with local government as well, which is awesome.
Yeah.
So, talking about your granny, we've already mentioned her now a couple times. I'm going into you growing up. So first of all, you grew up on Saulteau First Nation? In Saulteau First Nation?
In the area.
In the area?
We grew up right beside the reserve. My mom and dad were commercial guide outfitters.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so how was your upbringing? From where you're at right now, did a lot of this passion you get for Indigenous culture and your people, does that come from your upbringing with your parents and specifically your granny? Yeah. I'm just so curious, what were some notable things that you can think of that led you down this path specifically with your upbringing?
My granny
was
very, really strong. Like for example, we'd come home from school and we'd run into her, the home. Granny was living with us, of course, and we'd say, oh, blah, 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 to our mom, Oh, we learned this today. And she would go, shh, be quiet, kind of, and she'd tell us in our language, because she didn't speak English, she'd say, that language is not spoken in this house. Our language is spoken in here. You can learn that language and use it out there, but in here you speak our language. And we'd convert to our Indigenous language.
That's
her,
awesome.
Right?
Yeah, that's awesome.
So she made sure that we didn't lose that. And I think it was because of her experience also with the residential school, losing her little baby 6-year-old boy. So she was on a crusade.
Yeah. No, and it makes so much sense. And like I've heard that so many times where it was nice to be home in a safe place where you can use your language because that's how it stayed alive. Like if after during the residential schools, if everyone there then went home and continued not using their language, then we would be at a worse point right now. Wouldn't you say? Like now, we're still struggling to, bring back the language. A lot of people
that went to residential school forcefully lost their language.
Yeah.
Okay. So we did start losing our language, and like for example, I tell people, the impact of the WAC Bennett Dam and what it did there, it drove a lot of our people off the land, And I tell people that the land was like a university college for us, where we did our cultural activities plus the language was spoken on that land, So I tell people it's like losing a university or education center.
Yeah.
And I said I noticed then like in 67 when the dam was kind of finished. I was about 12, 13 years old. I noticed then the language started to even deteriorate already by then, after in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And I said now, and I talked about this because of the Site C dam. I said now that this dam is coming in and that big land base is being eliminated.
Mm-hmm.
I said that's another part of our college and university that's being eliminated. And I said it seems to me that because of my watching these things, and watching how we reacted and what during what times we started to talk less and less of our language. I noticed that more and more and more.
So what kept it even slightly breathing was the grannies out there forcing the family to use the language, you'd say, like other family members.
And some and you can hear these stories, some grannies didn't want to teach it to protect the children because they didn't want them to experience the same thing their own children experience, right? They didn't want
double-edged sword
to go through that pain. So yes, so the language is lost, per se. It's not totally lost, not totally, but a lot of our young people are now having to relearn. Just like as Indigenous people, I tell people through cultural safety, we have to relearn our past, bring it into the future so we can evolve in a good way. I said it's not about going, the old attitude, what, you want to go back to your teepees, you don't want electric lights, you don't want to drive a car, like all that nonsense. No, it's as a human race, we have certain principles and laws, sacred laws, that we can take into the future. I tell people, I said, for example, when I teach cultural safety, I think about my great granddaughter in the future holding a feather, and she's a captain of a starship, but maintaining her language and her traditions. So nothing wrong with evolving.
Yeah. No, I was just imagining that it's like a sci-fi movie. That's so cool.
And because of who we are as Indigenous people and what I was taught, when I say that, it's happening. I believe in it.
Yeah, that's so awesome. Where do you think we're at in the region right now with, and I know there's many different languages, but with the different communities and the work that's being put into reviving the languages, do you think we're at a good place? I think there's a lot of work going on in the communities. My example is, Doig Rivers is doing a lot there and putting in the research. Where do you think we're at right now?
Yeah, a lot of the bands in the area, Treaty 8, are doing that.
Which is awesome,
doing the history, all that stuff, their history and their languages. Teaching our little ones, say, for example, at Saulteau, and all the bands do this. They're teaching them in preschool about the language, about the drumming, the songs, and all that stuff, right? These things that were outlawed. Where if my granny did her ceremonies in public, or where an RCMP was walking by, she'd get arrested and thrown in jail.
Unbelievable.
So she had to go hide in the bush to practice our ways, right? Like they couldn't even get off reserve, right? You've heard of that too, probably. They couldn't even leave the reserve without a little ticket from the Indian agent, stuff like that. So a lot of oppression.
So you were an electrician by trade before you got into politics.
Yeah.
So what made you make the jump, and how long were you an electrician before you made the jump?
Oof.
Making you go back now. Thinking of all those time frames.
About 10, 11 years I was an electrician.
Okay.
Yeah. And I got my journeyman's, and I think they called it the Red Seal today or something like that.
I still think of it as Red Seal too.
Yeah.
So so after you graduated, let's say, where'd you go to school? Chetwynd. So you went to school in Chetwynd. Yeah. You graduated. Did you go right into the trade?
No, I didn't graduate.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So when did you start working as an electrician?
In the trade, I started working around 78.
Okay. And so were you around 18? Like, you young?
78, I was
I don't know.
How old was I? 55.
55. Okay.
Yeah, I was
Okay.
in 55. I was born, so that would make me, what is that? 55, 65, 75, 32, 33?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And that was when you got into electric, or
Yeah,
is there,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And so, when you finally, after 11 years, like made the jump, so did you go straight from working as an electrician into politics?
Yeah.
Yeah, like went ahead for it. So I guess before being an electrician, what were you doing? Just oil and gas? Just working?
Yeah, I worked in commercial, industrial, and house residential stuff.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I went and worked in the Yukon, and I did
Oh,
a little
nice.
bit of work
Did some
in
traveling.
Vancouver and Edmonton and Grand Prairie, and yeah.
So why did you decide to make the jump into, well, I'm saying
Elders.
jump a lot. Oh, elders? Yeah, I was thinking that they came and asked you.
Yes,
yeah, okay.
And I told them that time in 87, 88, I told them, I said, I don't know nothing about being a chief. And one of my uncles, who is the son of my granny, right, my mom's brother, he said no. He said, you do know things, because my mom always talked to you about stuff, told you about our people, about our leaders, and who they were, and what they represented, what they stood for.
And you guys go through terms of 4 years, right? A chief, or is it three?
Three now.
Oh, it's
Used to be
3.
4.
It used to be 4 because I'm thinking you were chief for 8 years, so 2 terms.
Yeah.
So you got put back in.
Yeah.
Obviously, the work that you were doing to get it in for 2 terms was working for the First Nation. So what were you doing during that time? Like, what are some milestones for you for the work that put into the First Nation?
Yeah. I think when I came around, the industry, government weren't really looking at us at all. We were there, but not. They didn't need to talk to us.
Okay.
At that point, So we started coordinating as chiefs at that time. We started saying, we really need to have a table too. Yeah, we're being over. They're riding over us here, right? So we started pressuring the government, industry, and we did strategies on how to do that, and to start bringing attention to that. No consultation, them years, no accommodation, no nothing, And the treaty says we can do all this, but yet they were still running, just kind of like, if you want to call it, like the Klondike Gold Rush, except it was oil and gas,
Yeah.
So we started putting pressure, and we started putting pressure in different ways with the industry. I said, why should we? They need us to come and talk to us about what their plans are, what they're going to do, and how they're going to impact our areas. Maybe some sacred areas, whatever it may be. Right? Why should we be using our own dollars to accommodate them? Said something's wrong with that picture. I said, what we should do as a group is start charging industry to sit down with us. Every time they sit down with us, let's have a fee. So we started doing that, and it started putting pressure for industry then to go to Victoria and say, hey, it's not fair. No, but
So did that result in then, revenue started to be generated into the First Nation?
Yeah.
Okay, sweet.
I'm doing this fast speed.
Yeah, I know. I know we could probably talk for multiple hours on this. Yeah.
So eventually they started talking about the Oil and Gas Commission being formed to address the capacity for the bands and to create a system of permitting where between the Indigenous folks and the industry folks they're kind of the middleman, Yeah. And based on regulations and Yeah. So that happened, but we still had a trouble with the Oil and Gas Commission being formed back then because we didn't have our say in it. And we felt we should at least have some sort of say in it on how it's going to be conducted or formed and all that stuff. But anyway, that's how it became. But it was a slow step in the right direction.
And then was that also building relationships with other communities in the Northeast too?
Yep. Yeah.
And sitting down with local governments and things like that to progress it and have those partnerships, right?
Meeting with the Line Ministries and Victoria and all that, Energy and Mines Act, and I think they were called.
So at the end of your tenure as chief of Saulteau, what year was that? I'm asking you all the hard questions.
Excuse me, 96, 97?
So 96, 97. And then when did you move over to being the tribal chief of Treaty 8?
During those years.
Oh, during those years.
Yes.
Okay, so you were a Saulteau chief and a tribal chief. Okay. So what's the difference? Because I know, obviously, as chief of Saulteau, you're chief of that First Nation, and with Treaty 8 Tribal Association, if you're the chief there, you're looking over, the best interest of all the communities, right?
You're a spokesperson for the whole Treaty 8 group of the First Nations, eh?
Yeah.
And, we sit at the table and we say, okay, there's Charlotte Town Accord. They're trying to push it, and we talked about it and we didn't like it, so I had to go speak on the issue why we didn't like it. Charlotte Town Accord. It was a form of self-government for Indigenous folks. And
okay.
We were opposed to it because it actually watered down our relationship, we felt, in regards to the treaty and that.
It put more restrictions on you? Or
okay. Yeah.
So essentially you're a spokesperson, like you just said, for the entire Treaty 8 nations.
So if say for halfway at that time, I worked with them a lot too, the late Chief Bernie Medachia, and he had some issues with forestry, and we started addressing them, and he took them to court and he won, and all this stuff. So consultation started to pick up, and accommodation, all that stuff. So then we had to, sadly we had to fight for that, where if I would have been in cultural safety back then, no, it's
if I would have thought of this back then. So, and I guess, where did some of the duties change? Like, what were the differences in duties as a chief of Saulteau, as a sole chief, compared to the tribal chief? Well, because I feel like it would be a little bit more extensive as a tribal chief, because you have to look at all the nations and how they're doing.
National issues.
Yeah. So it was really just a lot more extensive in the sense of you had to keep up and keep tabs on a bunch of different things going on,
and play a supporting role for the other bands too when it was needed. Where the chiefs would get together and support one band on their issue, and they would ask me to go stand beside that person or talk to whatever, government, talk to industry, along with that chief, whoever it was, stuff like that. So they knew we were supporting each other in all these different fronts that we were creating, to get the treaty more recognized. I call it that.
Did the association ever get involved with some of the lawsuits that other communities had? I haven't seen it, so I'm just curious if they have. They have. Okay.
Like we got involved with the Medachia case, where forestry, where they proved that forestry didn't consult with them properly, and they got kind of.
So my next question, you kind of brought it up, and we've been talking about it on the treaty. I was just thinking about it while we were talking, because you have extensive knowledge with the treaty. You've studied it. And eventually, and we could talk after the podcast, I want to do an episode with you just on the treaty. But I do want to bring it up right here. It's just so much to go into about it that I definitely will have to do a separate episode. But I want you to kind of explain. I mean, it might be a little long to explain your interpretation, but overall, what got you into studying the treaty? Because there's a lot of First Nations and leadership positions that obviously have an understanding, but to the extent that maybe you do, what forced you or what drove you to study it?
Was granny?
The granny again.
Because I told her one time about the treaty, and I was this young kid, maybe 15, 16. And I told her that, it's in the treaty, it says that we gave up the land, the resources, everything, but we maintained our hunting, trapping, fishing, all those stuff for maybe even $5 a month. It says, I told her in our language, said no, we never gave up. We wouldn't never give up the land, because we don't own it in the same way that they do. I said, we own it in the sense where we have an obligation to wherever Creator put us, to that land, to that wildlife, to that water, to the air. And that's our obligation on how we own it. Because we share it with the environment, eh? But we have a duty to protect it.
Mm-hmm.
So, Creator owns the land, but He gives us that obligation of ownership
To take care of it.
to take care of it. So, in that sense, yes, we do own it, but not in the European sense, where they can just take it, sell it, and all that stuff. Because European feel that they're like a superior structure, where we're with the environment, with our surroundings, right? Where the European mindset is that they manage the animals, where
They're above everything, like you're saying.
where we blend with the animals, per se, so that we can make sure that they're not, killed off, or make sure that certain areas we can burn for them, right? All these things, right? Or berries, all that stuff. Right? So, my granny said, "There's no way we would have extinguished that right to that land, to that title, to that," because she said we don't own that land, and that's a Creator owns it. She said, "There's no way in a sacred way that we would ever sell the Creator's property, because also because of that law, our obligation said it's our children that are yet unborn that own this land also, in that sense, in our law. So we have an obligation to our children not to sell that. So those are the sacred side of our treaty that we know, and so therefore I always tell people, no, it's a non-extinguishment treaty. Even we had TLEs just recently.
Yeah. Treaty land entitlements,
I'm one of those foolish people that opposed it. No. Yeah. And based on the fact that I said this when I was a chief at the Treaty 8 table, when we were dealing with land claims 30 years ago. I had a meeting with the government, the provincial and the federal government, over the land claim stuff that's being settled today, right? I said, I have a problem with this extinguishment clause. You want us to sign off and say, you're going to give us this much dollars, this much land, of our own land, actually, but anyway, regardless, that's what you're saying. And then, but you want me to sign off here where I'll never be able to expand my boundaries. And they went, that's right. So I said, tell me. I said, so tell me. We're sitting here in Fort St. John, this is what the Treaty 8 building. We're sitting here in Fort St. John. If we had an influx of 20,000 people tomorrow to Fort St. John and the land base couldn't accommodate it, what would you do? And they said, we'd expand it. I said, that's right. So that's why I'm confused at this table. I said, so there's one law for Canadians and one law of extinguishment, non-extinguishment for Canadians, extinguishment for Indigenous folks. But I said, so when we multiply in the future, which we will, we're
stuck in those borders.
Stuck right there. Eh?
So with the TLE right now, I actually don't know this. Is there room for expansion? Like
not after what was settled. With the
oh,
lands,
okay.
eh?
No.
And strategically, bands
pick their lands. Okay, so that they
you had to do it that way in a sense, because otherwise you would be stuck on an island.
Yeah. So no community would have just picked a land that would just kind of keep them isolated, like you're talking about. Okay, that makes more sense. Okay.
Yeah. So in that sense, like that's why I wasn't for the TLEs, eh? But I didn't argue with anybody about it. I wouldn't rant and rave about it. I just talked about it.
And your opinion on it and your perception of it.
Yeah.
Do you think every Indigenous person should have some understanding of the treaty?
Yeah, of course. Of course. TLE proves it.
So for those who don't understand the importance, and if they came up to you, what would you say to them on how important it is to have that understanding?
How important it is for the TLE. I talked about it.
Yeah.
Okay. I said, how can the government come here and ask us to make a decision on a treaty that, whereas vast majority of our people, their memory got erased about that treaty, the sacred treaty, and what its true meaning is? I said, that'd be like you, Trey, going to my grandson and saying, I want to buy your dad's truck. or your grandpa's truck. Here,
I do. You have a Ford Raptor. I want it.
and you say, here's some bubble gum and here's some blah blah blah, eh? and because he doesn't have a memory or of the value of that truck. That's what I say. The same thing. To me, it's you forced me into residential schools. You forced me out of my language. You forced me out of my sacred ways. You forced me out of my sweat lodge. You forced me out of my whatever. Eh? Don't do that anymore. And in those 600 years, you began to erase my memory. And yet here you are today asking me to make you a deal on the value of the treaty when I don't fully understand it, because you're the one who's responsible for erasing my memory of it. So I think that's kind of sharp dealings, just as sharp as dealings as they did when they negotiated the treaty.
Yeah. The only word that comes to my head is dirty. This sneaky, it's almost like they knew what they're doing.
I got a few other words, but
we
won't use for the podcast.
I want to delve into a little bit more about your experience in the energy sector. Got a couple more questions here before we wrap up. Yep. But this one, so from your perspective, how are Indigenous people and the energy sector tied together? And the reason why I'm bringing that up is it seems to have been going on for a long time. Is it because of land use and the impacts energy has potentially on cultural traditions? I don't know when it started or if that's the main reason, but the relationship always seems to be brought up. When you bring up energy, Indigenous communities and land is always land use. Yes. It's always about that.
You're impacting on my land use, right? Therefore, at least what other economy can I do? So maybe I'll without damaging certain areas. Certain areas are just off limits, right? They are. But that forces the issue. But still, it's not a good relationship. When people have to be forced into a relationship, it's not cool. Whether you're industry or Indigenous, right?
Yeah.
Because you're kind of forcing each other into a relationship. Right?
Well, initially they were forced into that relationship. And now where we're at now, do you think there's still that, contentment?
Yeah, a bit.
Okay.
Yes.
Because
it's not rosy yet.
Okay.
Yeah. It's still, what's the word? Stigma?
There's still a stigma around it?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I was also going to bring up, and this might be a part of it too, the results of the cumulative impacts case from Blueberry and the TLE signings as well. Has that had a real impact on the energy sector? Because I've been hearing rumblings from, people in the industry, people in First Nations communities that, there is definitely some things being said from the energy side with this agreement that happened. But I can never really, get someone to tell me their view.
Because a lot of industry felt like when that decision came forward, they felt like, oh my God, they're going to be able to just shut us down. Then what are we going to do? Well, maybe we'll have to just move out of BC and go somewhere else. There's always those.
I've heard that a couple times.
There's always those threats, but to me, I call those desperate words. Because of the fact that if they looked at it with open eyes, the Indigenous folks and the industry folks and the government, okay? If they looked at it with open eyes and said, what does this really mean to all of us, this decision? And I told this to Peace River Regional District. I said, using cultural safety, we could utilize decision in a positive way because of the cumulative impact on the land base. I said, there's nothing stopping us in the future to creating a joint cumulative impact assessment of all of I'll say yours and mine, Peace River area. What are the thresholds where it can hold oil and gas? What are the thresholds it can do for forestry? What are the thresholds it can do for mining? What are the thresholds it can do for cattle? What are the thresholds, et cetera, right? I said, if we start looking at it that way and saying that we can share it, without fighting with each other, and be genuine about it. How can we create an economy that's going to last longer? How can we create out of this cumulative impact assessment model that we can use as a crystal ball, if you want to call it that, of our Peace River area to maintain its value in the long run on the economics, on the environment, all this stuff, that people are concerned about. I said, it's not just Indigenous folks that are concerned about the environment and want to stop everybody.
Yeah.
We're that's not what we're saying. We're saying in these areas, slow down until we have a solution, right? So this cumulative impact decision we could look at it in a good way versus an ugly way.
Because they see it as them being limited, and then they have to jump through another hoop. I would assume.
When you're used to just taking and taking
Yeah.
and taking, of course, you're going to say I'm limited.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the First Nations are saying, "Hey, we want to be a part of the table. Bring us in." Right?
That's right.
So, in terms of the energy sector and that relationship with communities, what do you think the future looks like for the region? Do you think we're going to move in a positive direction? Because I remember I had a similar question to Chief Trevor McCauday with Doig River, and he said, "Oh yeah, they might leave. They'll come back. The Montney Play is one of the richest in the world.
Right.
They'll come back." So is there any fear for the future, or do you think, we'll get there?
Yeah, I really do feel like we will get there. And it's just a matter of all of us understanding each other. Understanding each other's world. I'll go back to that again. Cultural safety.
Yeah.
Understanding each other's worldviews. And finding that we're not enemies. We're actually friends because we're here. We've been here this long together. Saulteau's we came here, but we've been here this long, and we've been able to live side by side with the Tseke Dene people and the Daneza and the Cree and the Haudenosaunee people from back east who are here, and the Slavey up north and etc. So we've been able to do that, and with all the other towns and all that stuff. We without realizing we have done it. It's just now we have to fine tune it.
Exactly. Little tweaks.
Yeah.
Well, not little. There are some major tweaks in there too, but tweaks, like you're saying, been here for decades, centuries, you know what I mean? It's just coming together. Well, I had a wonderful time chatting with you, Stewart. This always happens. I literally just said this for my last episode. I definitely want to talk to you again. And like I said, we'll have a chat because I would love next June, maybe.
Yeah.
We do that episode around June 21st, and let's talk and delve into the treaty. And I would love to hear your interpretation because you've studied it since a young age, and I've looked over it, and my understanding of it is very minimal, and I would just love to get your take on it. My last question, every episode we ask this question, and I will say this: you don't have to say positive things about it. Your opinion on it can be any way. You don't have to say nice things.
I can spit on the floor.
If you want to. What does reconciliation mean to you?
Reconciliation is just a bastardized word. In the sense of government, okay? And even industry, because remember a little while back I was talking about me being free, you being free? Until that happens, then we can have reconciliation. That means you understand my worldview, you understand my treaty, you understand all these things, and I understand you. And then we can move towards reconciliation, Just like when they do acknowledgements of the traditional territory of so-and-so, wherever you are in Canada, right?
Yeah.
I say it falls short.
Oh, okay.
I kind of get insulted by it, in a sense.
Okay.
And why it is that you acknowledge this territory, say Daneza or whatever.
I have at the beginning of this podcast, we have it for most too.
Akwesasne in the east or whatever. Right?
Yeah.
I said, you acknowledge that you're on their territory? I said, but you stop there and then you go on with your life, your meeting.
Okay.
I said, I tell people, acknowledge it, but acknowledge with the shortcomings that we still have to deal with.
Yeah.
Even though this is we still have a long way as Canadians to reconcile and and bring back a true relationship based on a power balance, whatever, right?
Yeah,
Something, but don't say, and then.
So it's as if like, and I've heard this so many times, and that's why I said this, say what you want about the reconciliation, because I've heard, people saying very positive things about it, and other people being like, no, it's just a buzzword. Is where's the action, and I think it's said so much that the meaning and passion and original thought behind it is lost, and I think part of it is because the overusage of it, mainly by the government, in my opinion.
So even quickly, when we did with PRRD, that word came on the table, and I explained to them why it shouldn't be on their graphic illustration. I said what you should do is actually walk towards it first and build it without saying that word with the Indigenous folks in the area. Build that relationship first. That's based on a power balanced approach and your understanding of the world, Indigenous worldview, their understanding of the local government worldview. Let reconciliation evolve without having to say, we believe in reconciliation. What is reconciliation? You're not there.
So you don't think any of us are there yet, right? We still have a lot of work to do. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, thank you so much, Stewart. Again, I love chatting with you. Wish we had multiple hours to have this conversation, but I promise we'll align something to have you on again. Thanks, Stewart.
Thank you.
I hope you guys enjoyed that episode as much as I did. I will remind you, make sure you subscribe to Before the Peace using your favorite podcast app or at Energeticcity.ca/podcasts if you haven't. Also, if you have any guests or program ideas, please email us at beforethepeace@moosefm.ca or at energeticcity.ca.